and welcome to this session on Okta's journey to passwordless and phishing resistance. Can everybody hear me okay?
It's a little quiet.
It's a little quiet?
How about me? Test? Oh, yeah, that's definitely way louder on me.
I don't think you can adjust it on that side, Dave.
Oh.
Yeah, they might have to do it in the back.
Hello, hello. A little better, a little better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just keep going.
La, 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 la.
Sing a little song real quick.
We wanted to start off with a laugh. Okay, is that better now?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so before we get too deep into this, I would like to remind you that we may work for Okta, but we don't speak for the brand or the company. I need to show you this wonderful safe harbor slide to make sure I don't inadvertently make any statements that could be interpreted as pertaining to our roadmap, future capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. I invite you all to read all of this at your leisure, but on your own time. I will happily show it to anybody after we are done here. There we go.
Okay. I'm Andrew Mesa. I'm a senior identity engineer at Okta.
And I'm Mandy Neely, also a senior identity engineer at Okta. And Andrew and I are teammates on Okta's Identity and Access Management team, formerly known as the Okta on Okta team. Our team manages our implementation of the Okta product, but more so than that, we are the first customer on all things Okta. We design and support our business on our platform. And our team mission is to deliver the best-in-class experience for our employees and customers. We approach this across 3 pillars. The first being probably the most obvious, is to enable the business. We own the Workforce Identity Cloud implementations for Okta's commercial and federal businesses, as well as the Customer Identity Cloud implementation. There we go, it's just a little slow. A second guiding principle of our team is to ensure we are evolving our product. This means partnering with our engineering, product, and quality teams to provide feedback and influence how our product is built, making sure it serves our needs as a growing company, as well as the needs of our customers, big or small. And finally, we showcase the platform. We share our experiences running Okta on Okta. While we get plenty of questions about how to build things, one of the most frequent questions we seem to get is how we use our own product to meet our business needs. All of this means our team is more than just an internal IT service provider. We are a competitive advantage. Just like all of you in your respective organizations, we represent the voice of the practitioner within Okta. As our own first customer, we benefit from the firsthand experience of securing the business on our platform. Just like you, we want to be able to point to our own implementation as a reference for how identity problems can and should be solved. For example, our journey with tightening our security posture through ditching the passwords, utilizing phishing-resistant multi-factor, and approaching things through a lens of zero-trust architecture.
Before we jump into that, let's explore why we want to get rid of passwords in the first place. First, passwords are reusable. I'm just not talking about your internal password reuse policy. I'm talking about the tendency of the average person to use passwords across multiple different services and sites. That means if one of these gets popped, then the rest of the accounts using the same password are all at risk. Best practice is to use a password manager and store a unique and complex passphrase for each account, but this practice is rarely followed, especially if you aren't in the security industry. The reuse of passwords can be a single incident that gets exponentially more dangerous. These next two go hand in hand. Passwords are phishable or breakable. We all know this, whether it's a social engineered, a user's demanded to fork over their credentials, or the credentials are just brute forced. The end result is still that the lock that is our authentication method is getting cracked open by someone who shouldn't.
There we go.
Okay. Next, passwords are expensive to maintain. Consumers have to manage their passwords, and compromises make that effort moot and more expensive each time. Having to call the service desk to help reset your password is not free. In fact, according to a study conducted by Beyond Identity back in 2022, a study showed that these issues were costing companies roughly $480 per employee annually. And running this through an inflation calculator on savings.org, $480 in 2020 is now $528 in 2024. And finally, passwords are just tiring. Password fatigue, it's a real studied phenomenon, whether it's setting the password, remembering, or even just typing it in. Evenness says administrators should not require memorized secrets to be changed arbitrarily, because users tend to just choose a weaker, more memorized secret. When they know they have to change it in some time, they'll just choose to change a random number within that password. You're tired of the massive amounts of passwords, so you decide to just start reusing a few here and there in different services. And you're tired of credentials being compromised and that just being out of your control. And you're tired of spending so much money just tending to this. And
speaking of tiring, an all too common story. An end user gets a call from their IT department who says that they see some problems and need the user to provide their credentials. The average user, hands it over without a question, and boom, you're compromised. So when we started saying, I know, let's use MFA, it seemed like the answer to end all the problems. But then the attacker just added a few extra lines to their script and said, oh, now for security, we need that passcode you see. Great, thanks for being so secure. MFA can be summarized in the very common saying of something you know, something you have, something you are. Something you know could be your password, something you have could be that passcode, and something you are would be something like your biometric identity. Learning what we know isn't always hard. Sometimes it is much easier than we expect. Same with getting access to something we have. It's much harder to take what we are, not impossible, but much harder, hence the title phishing-resistant MFA, not phishing-proof MFA. So here's the threat model as we see it. Assume that the user is willing and able to give access to a third party. How do we make access being willingly given as unlikely as possible while minimally impacting the legitimate user experience? SANS Institute summarized it well in a recent blog post on the topic. Phishing-resistant MFA is nothing more than the same authentication process, but people are removed from the equation. So, the first big benefit of implementing phishing-resistant MFA helps limit the available attack vectors, avoiding things like SIM-jacking or exploitation of SS7 vulnerabilities. While an attacker can still break credentials, we're obstructing their path to complete account takeover by restricting access to the thing you are authentication factors. Unless we are chopping off fingers to trick fingerprint readers or plucking out eyeballs to trick those retina detectors, I think we can safely say one of those categories is at least a little harder to phish. Okay. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency says, while any form of MFA is better than no MFA, and it will reduce an organization's overall attack surface, phishing-resistant MFA is the gold standard, and organizations should make migrating to it a high priority effort. Some legacy systems may not play nice with phishing-resistant MFA, but it's a necessary evolution of the landscape of our world. It is on us to continue strengthening our organization's security posture and move away from these outdated systems, even if it annoys our end users most of the time. You either die a security hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the IT villain. And I will be an MFA villain any day. For those of you who don't know, I'm a giant Batman nerd, and I'm so pleased that I got to get a Batman reference in. In May of 2021, the White House released an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity as it faces persistent and increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns, this is all a quote by the way, that threaten the public sector, the private sector, and ultimately the American people's security and privacy. This order outlines major requirements necessary to strengthen the security posture of the federal government and their partners, including the push to move to zero trust architecture. So what does all of that mean? Implicit trust is out the window. We've moved past everything being network-based. Identity is the modern perimeter of functional security.
In a post-COVID world, there's no arguing anymore. The cloud is here to stay and must be secured. This lovely graph from Flexera, 2024 State of the Cloud Report, which showed cloud usage is still on the rise. 753 organizations were surveyed about their organization's cloud usage. 89% of those surveyed reported the usage of multi-cloud environments, with 73% of those utilizing a hybrid cloud approach. We aren't getting away from this, so redefining our security perimeter from the network segment to the actual identity making or taking actions allows us to be inclusive to those lovely little clouds we are all immersed in. When you only trust what's verified, it's much easier to limit the blast radius of an actual attack. The more we can segment, the more we can bolster the protections to protect against lateral movement. Zero trust architecture requires a continuous validation of what is actually being used. We can use the logs to identify what is actually being used and what is used to ensure that we are meeting least privilege, separation of duty, etc., etc. If I haven't used my admin privileges in 3 months, then why do I still have it? And lastly, the saying goes, better safe than sorry. It's not as catchy as zero trust architecture, but here we are. Constant vigilance is how we stay as safe as we can.
So how did we do this at Okta? When we were transitioning our internal Okta tenant from Okta Classic to the Okta Identity Engine, Okta FastPass was the app that met all our needs. FastPass lets us sign into our resources from any device where FastPass is configured without the need for a password, and it utilizes phishing-resistant MFA. Now, we are not here to sell you on an Okta product. Keeping the principles that we just chatted about in mind, let's talk about why FastPass met those needs for us. Okay. First off, phishing resistance enforced inline during authentication for any device. Should I use FastPass to authenticate on a phishing page that is impersonating a legitimate website? FastPass will verify that the origin of the authentication request matches the site where I'm attempting to gain access. If a mismatch is detected, the Okta backend server responds back with a error code, alerts me to suspicious activity, and the phishing attempt is logged. And it also fails the authentication attempt. There's device posture checks and context reevaluation to ensure the security of the devices in use. We have our device assurance policies built out and utilized heavily in our authentication policies for all of our resources. Ooh. Okay. This one led to Okta's latest billboards. Passwordless sign-in experience across browsers, apps, devices, managed or unmanaged. I just have to tap my Touch ID, that's a tongue twister, on my MacBook or scan my finger on my phone. Lastly, integration of the security stack, which can be used as another medium for SOC alerting or stacking factors in a policy. I think my favorite that we use internally is probably the CrowdStrike score integration, which we built into our authentication policies to be rejected at various agent scores, which fluctuate based on the device signals. So 2 years ago, we launched OIE and FastPass at Okta, and it had a very big impact. Within 1 year, half of our authentication events in our tenant used FastPass. To be clear, this is our internal tenant. This is not anything customer facing. A full 3/4 of our authentication used a passwordless technology. Compared to the time cost of traditional MFA, this yielded over 7,700 people hours saved per year. which results in about 473,000 in annual time savings per year. But these were just the numbers from 2022.
We wanted to eliminate passwords and non-phishing resistant authenticators from our auth policies altogether, and we challenged ourselves to do so by the end of 2023. To do so, this required multiple internal organizations across business technology, product, engineering, and security to identify which policies, processes, and platform changes we would need to execute in order to accomplish this. The project was dubbed Steel Curtain, drawing inspiration from the nickname for the 1970s Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line, which some claim to be the best defensive line of all time. I'm not really into NFL, but to quote the project, Okta Steel Curtain can be thought of a defensive team that brings together the best minds across the company in a united front as we look to cement our place as a permanent place in one of the world's leading security companies, not just an identity company.
So with guidance from our security team, we started with tackling the low-hanging fruit of this massive undertaking. We pinpointed the ways that we could remove phishable factors from our existing authentication policies without requiring platform changes or disrupting business operations too much. And we started editing the policies in increments, testing thoroughly as we went. To be completely fair, though, we also used this time to identify some of the avenues that we wanted to leave a little bit more accessible. Like a user who lost their device, they can't exactly meet device assurance policies if they just lost it. That said, we feel pretty confident that this is as phishing resistant as we can be for accessing our resources. Like afraid to hit the button too much, Rose.
As any other good data-driven company does, we're collecting a ton of metrics as we took each step in this plan. We established a baseline of authentication events, and we were able to see a clear trend in the data over the next year. Adjusting the authentication policies made the biggest impact in reducing our numbers of password usage. You can see here that we spent a few months in 2023 where our password usage was stuck at around 2% of all authentication events. There's one gap we needed to cover, and that was unmanaged iOS devices. We needed to ensure that every single BYOD device supported a phishing-resistant flow, and this was a bug that we were hitting.
So Okta Verify runs an HTTP server on the device on a local host port that listens and responds to probing requests from the Okta sign-in widget. For example, when you authenticate into an app protected by Okta, you'll be redirected to the Okta sign-in widget. The sign-in widget silently interacts with the loopback server. The loopback server sends a challenge assigned with a private key along with the origin domain and the device context singles, which the server can verify. If the policy conditions are met, the Okta backend will generate a SAML assertion, or OIDC access token, and redirect the browser to the service provider. So when Okta FastPass uses the loopback server method on iOS devices, enabling iCloud Private Relay can lead to authentication failing to meet the phishing resistant requirement, and it sends the user back to select their authenticator. This issue arises because Private Relay reroutes all the network requests through Apple's relay servers, including those that were intended for the local loopback server. Due to this rerouting, the loopback server doesn't receive the login page's response, disrupting the authentication process. Consequently, the factor isn't recognized as phishing resistant because the communication necessary for this verification doesn't reach its intended destination.
Thank you, Apple.
Exactly. Okay. Now this is where I want to remind you of our team's core principles. To continue on this path of being fully phishing resistant in our tenant, our team needed to be confident in our implementation of the product. We needed to point out bugs and push for the resolution that we needed to get our tenant going, and help provide our partners with what they needed to bridge the gap. So because we were going forward and forging this path to enable our business, we have the necessary insights to provide where to push the product evolution and while showcasing our abilities to actually use our own product.
So once our gap was identified, we had the information needed to help work out exactly what we needed in order to accomplish our goal of going passwordless by the end of 2023. Patches were put in place, policies were updated and thoroughly tested, users were trained on the latest details and workarounds for their chosen devices. So the time came to deploy it into production. We took the leap to close our gap. We pulled some fresh numbers right before we came here. And it's interesting to see how much we've grown. As of April of this year, 98% of every authentication event in our tenant used FastPass. To be transparent, it is 98.67. When we add in the rest of our passwordless methods, it's brought up to a whopping 99.556%. Compared to our baseline from August 2021, this means we are saving approximately 45,000 person hours per year. And when we compare our extrapolated years against each other, this amounts to over $1 million of time savings. Here we have a apples to apples comparison of those two different slides I showed you. And now we can demonstrate every year compared to August 2021 baseline back when we were in Okta Classic.
Close to the computer.
Oh, it's on the computer.
I give up. We're going to do that.
I love technology. All right. Another learning we had was that if we were worried about ensuring resources were behind phishing-resistant policies, we needed metrics that could actually show us what percentage and what resources were actually behind phishing resistance. Our total authentication events was a useful but imperfect measurement of that progress. This is our phishing resistance score of our tenant, broken down by the resources that were being used and the authentication policies behind it. We clearly have more to do to truly get to 100% phishing resistance across our full identity lifecycle, as we mentioned before. We can't reasonably block every single avenue like a user who needs to reset their password or they lost their device. But reporting, monitoring the stats like this every month help us pinpoint where we need to go in order to look for the next place to whittle away at that and bring us closer. We're always working to improve our posture, but now that we've ran this particular race, you may be wondering what's next for our team. Well, for those of you that are curious, I can share a few things. We've been hard at work on our MDM solution, building the structure around our time-boxed admin roles, and overall general hardening of our corporate infrastructure. The headline for all these things and more is called Zero Trust is the Way to Go.
And in February of this year, Okta's CEO announced the launch of Okta's Secure Identity Commitment. I won't restate the entire thing here, but I do invite you to read it on Okta's blog. I'll keep it to one sentence, as I think it's a great way to summarize this entire presentation. We will relentlessly invest in our approach to defense in depth and a zero-trust security architecture to reduce our attack surface, mitigate the impact of a compromise when things do go wrong, and prevent the threats of the future. Thank you guys all for your time and attention. Again, my name is Mandy.
And I'm Andrew.
And enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
We are out of time and don't have time for questions today, but feel free to find them at the party tonight and quiz them on their project. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks again.